Effective comics narration. What do I mean by that? So when I say narration, obviously there's narrative. Narrative is just storytelling, right? When I say narration, though, I specifically mean those little dialogue boxes, typically in squares, where you have a narrator talking over the story. So why would you want to use narration? So there's a lot of reasons. First of all, one of the most important things I feel about using narration is that it is the equivalent of a first person point of view. So when you read prose, and it's written in AI format. It's written from the perspective of a imaginary character, or if it's memoir, from the writer and narrator. That's first person point of view. That's effectively what narration does. These are voiceovers told in the voice of either a real narrator, which is the author, or an imaginary narrator created for the purpose of the story. So you can use it for a lot of different reasons. You can use it to explain facts and ideas, as well as events in history from an invisible or off-panel narrator. So nonfiction, right? What about memoir and journaling? In memoir and journaling, narration bridges the gap between author and reader, present and past. It creates this bridge between the person who's writing the story or pretending to write the story, right? Because journaling can also be told from the perspective of an imaginary journalist, right? It bridges that gap between your reader and the person who's narrating that story. Also, it can help to introduce characters, usually at the beginning of a story, and it gives readers access to their internal thoughts and perceptions. It can also establish boundaries within which the story exists. So let's go through each of these. By the way this is set up is I start usually with a lecture, but then we actually do sort of the more, we have a few exercises towards the end. So we'll probably lecture for about 45 minutes, maybe less. And then we'll move into the more kind of exercise portion. Here we go. First, start with some coffee. So let's talk with explanatory narration. When I say explanatory narration, I mean nonfiction. Nonfiction is explaining something to people, right? This is perhaps the most obvious genre for using narration in comics. And that's because it's really useful for covering a lot of information quickly over a vast amount of time. It is most often used in science, political, and historical comics. For example, in Andy Hirsch's science comics, Rocks and Minerals, Geology from Caverns to the Cosmos, and you'll see at the bottom of every page, there's credits, by the way. He opens this book by discussing the Big Bang. You can't play out the Big Bang, and it's difficult to play it out in real time. There's no people, there's no, how do you put dialogue in that? So what narration does is it bridges a gap between that first moment. The Big Bang marks the beginning of the universe. From a single point, everything comes into being, that moment, right? To this moment, everything is a mess of strange, tiny particles smaller than small. So narration here bridges time. In What Unites Us by Dan Rather, it's actually by a bunch of people, Elliot Kirshner and Tim Foley, but it's a political story, partly memoir, partly politics, partly history, told from the perspective of Dan Rather. And so occasionally he kind of pops into the story as a character, but most of the time he's a narrator narrating all these events as we go from event to event to event in American history. It'd be really hard to have him in every panel speaking, so we use narration to tie all these events together to keep it moving quickly and fast. In The Transcontinental Railroad Crossing the Divide by Andy Hirsch, you have kind of at the top of this page an airplane. And then a 5-hour flight separates the Missouri River in the American Midwest and the Pacific Ocean in the West Coast. They're practically next door. Somehow these same 1,500 miles are far wider in the early 1800s. A journey by land sends you across arid plains, through Native American nations, over mountains, and far from help when trouble finds you. Trouble will find you. It's got most of a year to do so. Going west is terrible. Look at the contrast. You have the first panel, an airplane, right? Zooming through the sky, something modern. And then we're actually tracking back into the past. And Andy Hirsch is using narration to do that. It'd be very difficult to play this out in real time without that narration that kind of ties all these events together. So When are there times you want to avoid using narration in nonfiction? Because there actually are times you don't want to use narration. Well, for example, a lot of biographies often don't use narration because, so this story from about Joan of Arc, written by Sarah Winifred Searle, illustrated by Maria Capelle France. This story is told entirely from the point of view of Joan of Arc. There's no narration. There might be occasionally a little balloon saying like what time it is, where she is. So the year, the date, kind of, they're not really narrations, they're details, specifics. The reason you'd want to do this is in historical and biographical comics, they often avoid using narration when the purpose of the story is to exist in that moment. That way, the reader can watch events unfold in real time, observing the story as an insider rather than as an outsider looking in. What this does is it builds a story focused more on the emotional intensity of the moment, centered in the context of historical events. So we're still telling, in essence, nonfiction. We're still telling a factual story, but we want to focus on the emotional aspects of the story. So we don't use narration. What we do is we let events unfold in real time. So March, written by John Lewis, Andrew Aiden, illustrated by Nate Powell. This is an incredibly emotional story because it's told from the perspective of those people marching across the bridge. So kind of want you guys to read this with me, follow along as I read it, and see how different it reads from something that would be narrated. So we start with Edmund Pettus Bridge. Can you swim? No. Well, neither can I, but we might have to. And then we have this panel down here. We have people crossing the bridge. It's just this sort of dark, stark silhouette. And then we switch points of views to these people who have hard-on hats on. We don't really see their faces. They look kind of ominous, right? They even have gas masks on. Then we just pull back shot, wide view of the bridge. Zoom in on these people with their gas masks and gun. There's actually a dog with sharp teeth in the foreground. And then this man yelling, "This is an unlawful assembly. Your march is not conducive to the public safety. You're ordered to disperse and go back to your church or to your homes." Notice how this story is a real event that took place, but what it does by leaving out narration, it focuses on that emotionally charged moment. This is an incredibly beautiful story about the feeling of what it was like to actually be there. So by leaving out narration, you allow the reader to exist in the moment of that story instead of sort of glossing over it a little bit, right? If we were just to kind of do narration in nonfiction, it almost draws your reader out of the story. You're just kind of reading about events. If you want them to be emotionally engaged, you might consider leaving out the narration or consider a mix of the two, right? Make sure I have. So next, what's another reason we would use narration? Well, memoir and journaling. Specifically in memoir, narration makes it clear that a story is based on the author's past. I think one of the most kind of clear-cut examples of this, kind of classic examples, is Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, where you can actually see the way where she's talking right at the top here. Indeed, the result of that scheme, a half bull, half man monster inspired Daedalus's greatest creation yet. She's speaking this very poetic language. It's like she's writing in a journal. And then we get separate panels, separate balloons for the way she interprets these events, right? So she has a bit of what's going on in her head, what she's thinking, the narration, right? And then we get imagery that sort of confirms that, kind of moves the story along. And so you almost have, the way she lays this out, almost two stories, the narration and the visuals. Now, you want to do more than just recount the past using narration. You want to do more than tell the story. Something you can do with narration is, what it does is it interprets that story through the lens of the author. And I think one book that does this really, really well is Welcome to St. Hell, My Trans Teen Misadventure by Lewis Hancock. And I love the way this opens. Welcome to St. Hell, where all is gray. So Lewis Hancock isn't just explaining like, this is St. Hell. She could have said, this is St. Hell where I went to school, right? He goes, where all is gray. Like you immediately have this perception of how he perceives this particular part of his past. And I want to actually read through the rest of this with you guys because it really portrays what narration can do really well. And this idea of seeing the lens of the past through the perception of the author. I was proper dreading starting high school, which at my school started year 7, age 11. The main character, when the characters kind of in the past, I'll say she. When I say Lewis Hancock's now, I'll say he, by the way, because this is sort of his trend before he's realized that he's male and before he's transitioned. So age 11, she's kind of looking at herself, age 11, this sort of skeptical look on her face, obviously worried. I had to make a decision of doom. Option A, option nay. Now look at this little sort of, it says option nay in a decision of doom. If these narrations were taken out, it was just option A and option nay, we wouldn't understand what this character's perception of pants versus skirt is. This is almost meaningless to us without the narration. I thought I'd definitely look like a boy if I wore the pants. By the way, I also love how Lewis uses these like very British slang words. It adds a lot to the feeling of the story. He's fit, here lad, but my cover was bound to get blown pretty quick. Ms. Lois Hancock's. Lois? Lois? Here, sir. Oh my God, it's a girl. What the fuck? Gasp. Are you tranny? Haha, he, she, freak. I really didn't want to get skidded. Dead bad. And then we come back to the present. Notice too, like the past, everything's kind of, a lot of it's sort of black when it transitions. I made your hand buddies, love. Don't forget, gasp. Mom, can you at least knock before you barge in my room? Oh, Lo, you're not even ready. You can't be late on your first day. Let's sort this room out. It's a right tip. So I went with the obvious choice. You look lovely, chicken. Snap. Time to be a real girl for once. Beautiful example of using the author's perception overlaid with imagery to really connect to the author. Another thing that this does, using narration in memoir, is it gives us a glimpse inside the author's imagination. In El Deafo by C.C. Bell gives us a look into, it's a memoir about her past and what it was like for her growing up deaf. And you have these asides though where the character sort of imagines who she could be. She thinks of herself as this sort of superhero because she has this like giant sort of microphone, this thing strapped to her chest that gives her the ability to actually hear like things in a really far away. So she has this sort of super hearing when she uses this device. And so we use narration to get, not just to get inside the character's head, but to understand what this character's feeling when she's imagining these things. Now, what about journaling? How's journaling different from memoir, right? Journaling's different from memoir in that journaling can be about, it can be a journal, like you have travel logs, right? That come from the author themselves. So it can be nonfiction, but it can also be fiction. You can have an imaginary character who journals. And what this does is it gives us a deeper dive into the consciousness of the main character. So in Ash's Cabin by Jen Wang, March 31st. A lot has changed since I last wrote. As you may have noticed, I have a new name. My name is Ash now. It still feels a little weird to write out like that. It's only been a month, but I know this is my name. I knew the first time I said it out loud to myself. The narration and journaling comics, they often feel a lot more kind of long form. They have large blocks of narrative text, offset by intermissions and more dialogue and action-driven scenes. It can even at times almost feel like comics with prose. Like on the next page in Ash's Cabin, you have this block of prose, and then you have a comics event, another block of sort of almost prose journaling and block event. And then further on in the story, you actually have sort of regular comics storytelling. Which, by the way, if y'all's microphones are on, you might want to check because I do hear a little background throat clearing every now and then. But then you notice like something that's kind of cool about Ash's Cabin in particular is when the main character's journaling, she only journals when she's actually writing in the story. So there's almost, I don't think there's any real events where she's like walking along doing something And then you have the journal insights as she's active in the story. The journaling happens when she has these quiet moments. Like in this scene, she's literally writing in her journal, and it's like we get to look over her shoulder and see things from her perspective. I love this. It's a beautiful story. A story about wanting to be isolated, and yet, what does it really mean to be isolated? So, how else can we use narration? A lot of different ways. I'm keeping up with y'all's. Oops. Make sure I haven't missed any comments. All righty. So narration. This is probably one of the also very common, other than nonfiction and memoir, it's probably the next most common use of narration is introducing characters, especially your main character. Introducing characters through narration makes it possible to leave out long or lengthy character introductions and cut straight to the chase. This is especially useful in series. So in The Investigators by John Patrick Green, we can summarize who are Mango and Brash, who are the investigators. Chapter 1, in a world plagued by crime, corruption, and confusion, one organization works in the shadows to right these wrongs, sending its top agents to solve any mysterious mystery. These are our stories. Investigators are on the case, Mango and Brash. That's narration. There's not a lot of narration after this, but it's a great way to introduce the characters. And you even see who the narrator is in this case. It's one of, I think it looks like Mango on the left. It's one of the actual investigators. When we allow characters to introduce themselves through narration, we can also give these characters control over how they're perceived by the reader. So in Crush by Svetlana Shumakova, I actually want you guys to read this, but read it first without reading the narration. So panel 1, we just kind of see this guy looking at his phone. We assume maybe he's the main character. We don't know yet if we're not reading panels, right? And the narration. Next page, we pull out. He's kind of busy while everyone around him on the bus is hammering and chatting, just being themselves. And then we zoom a little bit to the seat in front of him. Give it back. You'll rip it. Is there a problem here? No. Here. Good. Now, when you read it without the narration, you don't really get a sense of who this character is. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he someone in the middle? Like, how are we supposed to feel for him? So let's read this with narration. George Ruiz here. Actually, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. On the bus to Berrybrook Middle School like every morning, except weekends. They haven't taken that from us yet. You'll notice I'm kind of big for a middle schooler. A lot of people think I'm repeating a grade or something. I'm not. Give it back. You'll rip it. Because I'm big, people are kind of afraid of me. Is there a problem here? No. Here. Good. You bet I use that. Suddenly, this guy is kind of a hero. He's transformed to this character who's big and lovable. People find him intimidating. That we get that from the story. We also get from the narrative, he's a middle schooler, that he's big for his age. Look at how much the narration imparts to us through about the character, but also you get a sense of how he views himself. He's got a sense of humor, doesn't he? Like there are all these little asides where he says, except weekends, they haven't taken that from us yet. He's got a little bit of this wry sense of how people perceive him. He's self-aware. So we empathize with him through the narration based upon the way he views himself. We view him the way he views himself because of their narration. It's really cool. Something else that narration can do when we use it to introduce characters is it can even set us up for potential future dilemmas. In Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki and Rosemary Valero O'Connell, this is page 1. So you see this looks like a high school gym with balloons floating down, maybe a dance. Dear Anna Weiss. Now, notice how that says Dear Anna Weiss in what looks like a messaging box. And there's even a little icon above it that shows mail. We know somebody's writing this email, possibly to send it to somebody. And then we zoom, we see a girl looking at herself in the mirror, maybe putting on mascara. My name is Freddie Riley. What does this tell you? Dear Anna Weiss, that name alone tells you, oh my gosh, this sounds like this might be an advice columnist. Like it's Anna and Vice. It sounds like advice. So right from square one, if you just read the visuals, you think, oh, these kids are having a party and maybe here's our main character. But the narrative tells us the dilemma that this character is in trouble and she needs advice. And that's page one. Boom, it's beautiful. A lot of comics will use narration only to introduce the main character and leave it at that. You see that a lot. You get narration at the beginning, introduces the main character, and then we segue into the story. There's no narration after that. But if the narration continues, we stumble into the realm of character interiority. I love the concept of interiority. Interiority is the ability to get inside a character's head. Now, in comics that don't have narration, you can infer what the character's thinking through action, through dialogue, but you don't know unless you tell the reader. It's kind of an example of telling instead of showing. There are times that you tell the reader, even in prose, what the character's thinking, because you want to view the world, the perception of that character through their lens. So let's give you some examples. In Frizzy by Claribel A. Ortega and Rose Bosamra, this opening panel, I love it. She's got this glowing look on her face and someone's washing her hair. Clearly she doesn't want to be there. If there's no narration, we wouldn't know why. It's my cousin, not my cousin's fault, but I'm super mad at her for having a quince. So she's getting ready for quinceañera. And you know that just from the narration, right? We've been introduced to this character, but we also get a sense of how she views this. Like she clearly doesn't want to go to this quinceañera, and she clearly doesn't want to be there washing her hair. And it goes along, or maybe she does, like we don't know that yet. So we go along, all these women, she's clearly in a salon. She says to her mom, why do I have to get my hair done again, Mammy? We were just here 3 days ago. Ouch. And we have this just shot of her looking at the salon lady. Glennie always makes me feel like I was getting in trouble when she did my hair, as if my hair being curly and hard to detangle was my fault. Tisk, 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 tisk. I love this because without the narrative, you can't kind of understand what the character's thinking, but when we open that box into her head, we get the flavor of her thinking. We really get to hear what she's feeling. So it makes it very easy to connect to that character on a much more deeply emotional level. So this allows us to hear their thoughts and their interpretation of events. So another example, this was our pact by Ryan Andrews. And just so you know, the narrator is actually this kid right here. He is our main narrator. And that's when we saw him. You just see these faces, eyes of these two kids, right? And here in the distance, this bear with a giant basket. Good evening. Gulp. I quickened my pace. Something told me it was a bad idea to strike up a conversation with the bear this late at night, even when wearing such a dashing scarf. But clearly, I was the only one who got that feeling. Hi, I'm Nathaniel. So in this instance, this character isn't highly emotional. He doesn't have very exaggerated body language. He's a little more reserved, and you see that throughout the story. So the narration's great at showing how uncertain or hesitant he is, because with this particular character, it actually would have been very difficult, I think, for the artist, Ryan Andrews, and this was our pact by Ryan Andrews, that, how do you get in his head when you have a character who's very reserved? And so we see this perception, these events unfold through his eyes. And I love the last panel where he goes, but clearly I was the only one who got that feeling. Like this is an interior thought that adds depth and level to this particular sequence of events that you wouldn't get if it wasn't there. You just know they met a bear, maybe he was nervous, but other than that, like it adds this deeper level of meaning. Now, I did just get a question here from Aaron Siska. How is narration different from thought bubbles? So narration implies there's a narrator, someone who specifically is sort of telling the story, like something that's being told in the past, like a storyteller, like I'm telling you. This is something that happened to me, and this is how it happened, and this is how I felt about it, right? Thought bubbles are when you have like these little kind of cloudy balloons, right? is what that character in that time is thinking right that moment. So let's say let's say I was just kind of, I'm so bad at sort of, okay, so we'll go to like this right here. Good evening, gulp, I quickened my pace. So maybe like a thought balloon here would be what he's, or maybe, it'd be a better example is if we switch to this other character here, Nathaniel, and we had what he was actually thinking over here. That would not be narration. That would be a thought balloon because Nathaniel's not narrating the story. And the same goes, it can be a little weird, like deciding like if you need to do a thought bubble versus narration for maybe your main character. That one does get a little trickier. So the question is this the narrator in the present saying this, commenting on their past, or is this character right now thinking this thought right now? I hope that makes sense. So another reason you would want interiority, narration interiority, is it gives the narrator the ability to muse and for their mind to wander. So in Frizzy, I love how this character is just laying in bed and you get this long internal monologue of all her processing stuff, right? You can't do that without narration. And in Map to the Sun by Sloan Young, you have one character viewing the other, and there's this almost sort of musing poetic moment. When I'm by myself, I like to play like there's shadows all around me. Eyes follow me that only I can see, dodging out of reach of no one. She's musing, isn't she? It adds this sort of poetical nuance to the story, and maybe it doesn't further the story necessarily in that moment, but it gives you a feeling that she's feeling at that moment. It's like poetry. Another thing interiority does is it deepens their interior world in a way that actions alone don't always reveal. So in Laura Dean, we have our main character, Freddie is actually her name. And if you just had the imagery, no narration, and by the way, every time she narrates in this, it's like she's writing Anna Weiss. And we have her face, she's looking kind of hesitant, she's picking up some supplies, and then she's in a hall. You get a sense of uncertainty, but then you get the narration, embarrassing progress. Second hardest part of this, there are no secrets in high school. Kind of makes it kind of ominous when you hear like what secret is about to come out. What is she trying to keep secret, right? And that's actually a little bit of projection in the future with her best friend. So in Be Prepared by Vera Brosgol, okay, ladies, okay, lights out, ladies. And they say, click, someone turning out their light. Tick, 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 shh, chirp, chirp, crunch, crunch. I hope Sasha's candy was hidden really, really well. So you can tell from the imagery that this character is uncomfortable, right? And maybe you can guess why she's uncomfortable if you'd read some of the pages before, because they're not supposed to have candy, they're not supposed to have food, it draws critters. The camp counselor has just explained this to them, but we're sort of confirming that feeling of, I hoped Sasha's candy was hidden really, really well. But by the way, look at how it's written in past tense. That narration is typically told in past tense. Now, the one on the left is an exception because she's writing it as an advice letter, right? She's asking for advice. So that's written in present tense. This one's written in past tense because it is a memoir. The author recounting current events or past events from now. We always write in past tense, right? When we talk about events that happened in the past. If it were a thought balloon, it would be written in present tense. We can also use narration to contradict actions in a panel. And this is actually one of the things I feel is way underused in comics. And I wish people used more because I love it. So Laura Dean, at the top, we see the advice, sort of the narration says, of course, I handled that whole thing really, really well. By the way, she just caught her girlfriend cheating on her. Of course, I handled that whole thing really, really well. Does she look like she's handling it really well? Sob. She's breaking down. She's lying to herself and lying to this advice columnist. We do this all the time. I love this sort of when we have these contradictions between narration and imagery, it kind of shows like this is where the character really is. There's another example of this in Be Prepared on the right. Look at the bottom where this main character has just gone over to this girl's birthday party and she's feeling a little kind of outcast. And at the very bottom, she's kind of wandered into the kitchen. Sarah's dad worked for the government. Lots of their dads did. She's looking at the fridge, and on the fridge are pictures of this birthday girl's family, her mom, her dad, herself. They look happy. And at the bottom, it says, my parents were divorced. Love that contradiction where she's showing what she's looking at of a family that's together versus her own situation where her parents are not together. It adds a layer of complexity where she doesn't say like, I was upset or anything, but maybe she longs for that stability. You can definitely infer a little bit here from the very contradiction between the imagery that she's showing and the narrative that she's telling. But are there times when you want to avoid character interiority? And I absolutely say absolutely. So if you're kind of wondering, you're writing a story, and especially if it's fiction, and you're wondering to yourself, like, should I use narration or should I not? I think I would ask yourself these following questions. First, do you want your main character's motivations to be clear and unequivocal? Or do you want to leave that up to interpretations of your readers? So when you don't use narration, you allow the reader to sort of imbue the space interpretation of the characters, the actions, their story for themselves. So Bloom by Kevin Panetta and Savannah Gonna Show, this is a romance story between two boys, this love that is blossoming between them. There's no narration in this story, but it doesn't make it any less easy to connect to the characters. In fact, something that's really interesting is that by excluding narration, by not having it there, on a certain level, it almost makes it easier to become that character. When I read this story, I felt so many moments where I felt, oh, I've had moments like this. The reader actually has a tendency to project themselves into the characters when there's no narration. Whereas when there's narration, we have a tendency to connect to the other person as a reader. And so let's kind of keep going because I'm going to keep explaining this further. Second question you want to ask yourself, would you rather information come directly from the main character or through the unfolding of the story itself? So 5 worlds by a lot of people. It's a big team that puts this one together. They're all amazing. You have the main character, but you don't know that yet, right? You just know there's this girl sitting here at the top, clearly waiting for something. There's something over her head that looks like a halo, right? Left panel, there's this sort of distinguished looking people starting to cross in front of her. And we have dialogue, right? Isn't that the Lee girl? Yes, she looks a lot like her sister. Let's not speak of that one. Look at what we just got here. We got information from action. We know this kid is named Lee, is part of her name, that she has a sister, and they don't want to talk about her sister. But there's no narration here. This is dialogue. And then next panel, especially not before the council meeting. We zoom in on the next page to her face. She's crying, looking at a letter, but we don't see the letter. There's no narration. We don't know what this letter is about. And then she's wiping off her tears as another girl approaches. Hey, Una. Hi, Vea. Would you skip Beacon Day if it meant skip Beacon Day? Are you crazy? Say, did you practice the summoning dance? I'm not cut out for sand, Vea. My sister was the one. Just because she ran away doesn't mean you should give up. We have a few minutes. Let's do it together. This is a great example of story that unfolds by itself as opposed to using narration to explain events. A lot of times in fantasy or science fiction, I see a lot of people who are tempted to sort of have this big introduction of, in the world of such and such, in the year such and such, there were the blank people and the blank people, and they were at war, right? This big introduction telling the reader what this world is about. You don't have to do that. In 5 worlds, this beautiful example of using dialogue, action, and letting the dialogue and action kind of deliver the story for you, right? So if Sometimes I personally prefer that when it comes to fantasy and science fiction, because that's part of the beauty of actually discovering the world as you go along. So I would say don't be tempted if you're writing sci-fi and fantasy to just summarize everything through narration. You might want to consider exploring it through non-narration, using actions and dialogue to tell your readers what this world is about. So another reason another thing you want to consider if you want to use narration or not. Do you want your readers to live in the moment or to feel as if they are reading about an experience through the lens of the past? So what do I mean by that? So in This One Summer by Mariko Tamaki and Jillian Tamaki, we have these sort of beautiful scenes. So first of all, this is not narrated. When you see square boxes and there's like the time in it, 2:12, 2:49, there's no narrator in the story. It's just telling us what the times are. But when you go through this sequence, you feel like you see this girl sort of bent over, getting ready to putt a golf club. There's a golf ball, there's a claw machine, just someone walking, picking up a pebble, someone taking pills. There's all these little moments. And because there's no narration, it gives the reader the ability to sort of dive into those moments and feel like they're living those moments with the characters and coming to their sort of own feelings and allowing them to draw their own conclusions about those moments. Like, say this panel here where it says 5:02 p.m. and the main character is, I think she's picking at a pimple on her nose. I, as a reader, because there's no narration, I think, oh God, I remember that. That triggers a memory in my head for myself that connects me to that moment. Now, if there were narration here and it said that the character actually had something to comment on about this moment, I would feel what that character's reading. By not having narration, you allow the reader to feel their own feelings in that moment. Can add a sense of sort of immediacy to it, right? 4, would you prefer the reader to be a more active participant by allowing them to fill in the blanks? Or would you rather deepen the emotional ties between the reader and the main character by providing a window into that character's head? So this panel I showed you before with the balloons. Without the balloons, it's still actually a very profound moment. Readers have a tendency to look at blank space like this and fill that blank space in with either emotional thoughts or with recollections of their own. But the reader, the writer, Claribel Ortega, she really wants you to connect directly to this character. So she gives us that window. I wondered why our best meant not ourselves, and why adults always told me so many things that didn't add up. Be yourself. Honesty is the best policy, and then don't be yourself. Be what other people want. I wanted to be myself. I wanted that to be enough and for everyone to love me, especially my mom. You can actually feel like her stomach churning as you're hearing her thoughts, as she's musing, as she's thinking. It's a beautiful moment. And that connects me to this character, right? I am not this character, but I am connecting to this character the way I would to another person. And last but not least, do you want this to be your character story, or do you want it to be your reader's story? Stories that avoid character interiority through narration are often more open-ended and open to interpretation by the reader. It can make a story feel more mood or action-driven than agenda-driven. One way is neither better than the other. There's simply different approaches to comic storytelling. So when I say your character story or your reader's story, when you don't have narration, you allow the reader to create their own story, to interpret events the way that they want. It becomes the reader's story. And what that does, it usually creates this kind of more mood-driven piece, driven by the action, driven by the reader's interpretation. Now, when you have narration and you're getting into that character's head, that's when it becomes more agenda-driven. And when I say agenda-driven, I mean like the reader has the character, the narrator, has a specific experience. In the example of Frizzy, it's about her, Frizzy, the title, it's about a lot of her hair drama, but it's also the way she's perceived by her community, by her own mother, about learning to accept herself. That is the message behind the story. And that narration actually makes that message much louder. So neither approach is better than the other. It's just you have to ask yourself, which is better for what you're trying to do in your story? Do you want the reader to interpret it the way that they want? Do you want to leave it open-ended? Or do you have sort of an agenda? Do you have a mission with your story? Something you really want to say and you want to say it loudly? Narration then might be the best approach. So last one. Let's see, how much time have I? Oh, we're doing all right. These always go over, just so y'all know. I block out a lot of time. So, establishing boundaries. What do I mean by that? When we use narration to give the reader story boundaries, it can tell us the law of the land. So, page 1, and this was our pact. We have chapter 1, the Equinox Festival, and down here in narration, our pact had 2 simple rules. Rule 1, no one turns for home. Rule 2, no one looks back. These are the rules of the story. Our narrator has just told us that, hey, we're going somewhere, right? And no one can go back. So you can't go back and you can't look back, right? These are the boundaries of our story. And we know from page 1, 2, 3, these are also the boundaries of this graphic novel. Like, we can't break it. This is kind of what the whole story is about, is these rules. Also, boundaries tell us where we're going. This one summer, page 1, we have someone walking, right? Crunch, crunch, carrying someone. Okay, so we have this lovely pulled back wide angle shot of this girl being carried, probably by her dad, to this cabin in the background. Owago Beach is this place. We've got this long line of cars, right? Looking like they're in traffic. And then we zoom to this girl, where my family goes every summer, ever since, like, forever. Rose fingers. This opening here, this opening narration, and as I said, there's not a lot of narration in this one summer. It's very spare. But what this does, it establishes the boundary that we are going to Owago Beach, and that's where this story is going to happen. We're not there yet because we're clearly caught in traffic, but maybe this is where it's at. We've just given the reader a peek of where we're going. So that's a way that narration establishes boundaries, by telling us where we're going. It can also tell us what to expect. In Making Friends by Kristen Gudsneck, we have narration from the main character. Great Aunt Elma, as Will just said, the family can sort through my stuff. Heaven knows I have enough of it to go around. No, I want the mahogany armoire. It matches my house. She must have known the chaos that would ensue. We already know that this is going to cause a lot of trouble. This is give us an expectation just from the reader's point of view of what to expect, and that is chaos. And there is a lot of chaos in this book. It's great. So establishing boundaries early in a book gives it guide rails, but you don't have to keep using narration after you've established them either. You can do this at the beginning, like Mariko Tamaki does in this one summer, and then you can leave off it. It's just a way to kind of introduce the story to your character and say, okay, these are the boundaries around which the story exists, and it's not going to go outside of it. I love that. I love when we establish boundaries. However you use narration in your comics, it can be a powerful connecting tool between reader and narrator. So it's a great device, but you don't have to use it. Think of why you want to use it. Try to maybe play with it, like try using it. It's something I like to do. Like if you're kind of on the fence about it, use it, like write an example where you use narration, then write an example where you don't use narration, and feel which one kind of more strongly connects to you. So I did actually want to move into a few exercises. Are y'all keeping up all right? Because I've talked about how we've already used narration, why we use it, but I want to actually talk about how to make your narration better. Are we good, Jana?
I think so. I feel like people are staying tuned in. So yeah.
Do y'all want a quick break? Like a 5-minute break to do the potty, or are we good to go? Because I think we got another about 30 minutes in this.
I maybe don't break.
Don't
I
break?
might
Okay,
actually, Rivka, I might have to make you into the host because I have to leave at
totally fine.
1:45. I'll
Totally
make you.
fine. You know mine always go over, Jana.
Yeah.
It's not too bad because we started a little late with housekeeping. Alrighty, y'all ready for, so first of all, get something to write with. We have a very short kind of exercise. It's our only exercise, but I do want to engage you guys a little bit in thinking rather than just sort of absorbing like a sponge. I need y'all to squeeze out a little bit too. So go ahead and get some sort of writing utensils together, pen, paper, even if you're just at your keyboard. I'll give y'all a second to do that. Most of y'all are probably at keyboards, but I do like a pad and paper sometimes. Yeah, I know. Sorry. I wasn't going to say it said that, squeeze out. Maybe that wasn't the best analogy. But it was very visual. Alrighty. Squeeze out like lemonade. How's that? So, what are some of the common mistakes that I see? One of the most common mistakes I see when writing narration is using language. It's always a language that's bland, generic, and vague. So I want y'all to do something. Look at this phrase. We were in so much trouble. What's the visual? First, what's a visual we get from that? Kind of hold that in your head. First or second visual that pops in. Imagine a panel and the narrator's thinking, we were in so much trouble. Kind of, I'm going to give y'all a second to kind of visualize it. And then, oops, what I want y'all to do now is rewrite the sentence. Make it better. We were in so much trouble. That's so damn boring. What are some other phrases that you could use in this example? Like you have this visual in your head, someone's in trouble. And they're thinking, we were in so much trouble. That's just echoing what's happening in the story, right? Like, what if it was something like, if mom caught us, we were dead. Like, take it to that next level. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes. Let's see. Mode, timer. How about 2 minutes? Because it shouldn't take you guys long. And go. So you'll have 2 minutes to come up with some different ways of saying this and be as outrageous as you want. I forgot to start the start timer. Where is my timer? I'm just gonna look at my clock. And if you come up with ideas, if you have a few things to share, feel free to put them in the comments. But I may actually call on a few of you guys also to share as well when we're done here. Mary Jo goes, trouble bubbled around us like we'd been dropped in a witch's cauldron. Like how specific that is. Now imagine too, you're that character, right? What's that character, right? What are you thinking? How are you relating this event? Give you about 30 more seconds. Like bioluminosity, the wolf was at our door now. Could even just say the wolf was at our door. I normally avoid now, suddenly. Usually want to avoid kind of timed words. And that goes in prose as well. Mark, I could almost feel the sting in my ears from the lecture I knew I was going to be getting. I like that. Alrighty, who would like to share aloud their lovely language? Sarah just said the woman with the camera was going to get killed first. If you'd like to, raise your hand, by the way, if you wanted, or just turn your audio on and go ahead. I see Edna. Are you going to share, Edna?
Oh yeah, sure. Hi. I froze, my face burned, and sweat poured into my eyes and stung like crazy.
So my only critique on that would be that sounds a little more like prose. It's
Ah,
long.
it's long.
It's
Okay,
long.
thank you.
And you're kind of, it's like you're telling me what event is happening as opposed to how that character's feeling. I want to know how that character feels, not exactly what's happening, right?
Yeah,
That
thanks.
would be great for prose, by the way, because that's showing, not telling. But here you're kind of telling, right? This is interiority. I see also someone else. Myra, I think you unmuted. Oh, no, you did not. I thought I saw someone else unmute themselves.
Oh, I did.
Oh, go ahead. What's your name?
It's Jerome. This is my first time
Jerome.
doing one of these. This has been cool. I got to do more. But yeah. Oh, well, I did not expect that many monsters. And I got that one. I got my sister's definitely gonna tattle, and card declined. Damn.
Art declined. Nice.
Right.
That reminds me of in the Lego movie too, one of the characters goes unsubscribe to one of the characters to be like, I do not want to be a part of this. Y'all have so many great, so like read these. My knees locked harder than the door. My sister's, yeah, I liked that my sister's definitely going to tattle. How can I ask for forgiveness when I just killed them? I couldn't see the lights anymore, but I could feel the darkness. God, you guys are great. So look at this. Like there's so many better ways to write how a character feels. But for some reason, I see this a lot. I see it a lot. This is what I call paralleling. When you parallel the action in the panel and the words say the exact same thing, or they're put in a way that's a little too mundane, you guys, you can all do better because you just proved it. So let's keep going. I want you guys to aim for strong, distinctive language that captures the personality of your narrator. Use words that feel active rather than passive. Like, let's say they went up the stairs. Well, went is a very boring word. You know, did you leap? Did you lunge? I was terrified. Like terror is, terror is a pretty descriptive word, but what about mortified, right? There's so much beautiful active language out there. Don't be afraid to be lyrical, to be humorous or silly, smug or self-deprecating. I love in Crush by Svetlana Shmakova, the character is a little self-deprecating. He kind of makes fun of himself a lot. I love that. That's part of his voice. That's part of his personality, and it comes through. In Frizzy, Satellite Ears, we meet again. I love that. She could have just said, hey, like, she could have said something to the effect of, my ears stick out so much. I hate them. That's mundane. But it sounds like she's having a showdown with her ears, right? Like you almost see her with a pistol at the end of in a big Western, Satellite Ears, we meet again. In Ash's Cabin, the main character, Ash, has this dog who is clearly her best friend. She connects this animal probably more than she connects the people. She could have said here in this journaling, Chase was my best friend. I love this dog. But instead, she says, Chase is my familiar. Like that word, that's lyrical prose. She's saying something that is really using a very specific word that gives you a deeper sense of connection. Like this is like her spirit animal, right? Beautiful language. Again, and George, like I just actually mentioned this one, but if you want to read it again, look at the way he writes. It's like you've gotten some insight into his journal that he's writing for himself. You can hear him laughing. You can hear him kind of chuckling. You can hear sort of the seriousness also in his tone. There's so much fluctuation in the way that he writes and the way that his narrative sort of expresses himself. I think actually Svetlana Shmakova, she did the whole Barry Brook series. I think she's one of the best out there for how she writes narration, and the narration capturing the interior world of those characters. So another common mistake I see is when narration, dialogue, and imagery reflect each other too closely. This is what I was calling about parallels. So I actually took a panel from Awkward by Savet Shmaklova. And you have this character, you see just her back, right? And then in front of her, all these people. I changed what was in this panel to show something that I would never write. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. The reason it's too on the nose. It's saying exactly what's happening here. I could have gotten that just from looking at the panel, but instead she writes, okay, I can do this. Just convince everyone to. It's like she's giving herself a pep talk, right? We're hearing what's going through her head. She's not just narrating, we're feeling her sort of like drum herself up, right? Getting ready to explain this big idea that she has. It's wonderful. Also, don't be afraid to draw art that isn't directly connected to your narration. So if you have narration and you're talking about a specific person or event, you don't have to actually draw that person or event. So I'm going to start with this spread because it gives you a segue into the next spread. So from Anna Weiss to Frederica Riley, Dear Freddie. This is towards the end of the book where the main character finally gets a response from the person she's writing. First of all, we're not seeing the person who's responding, we're seeing the person she's writing to, which is Freddie. And then on the next panel, thank you for your emails, all your emails. So this character's sitting beside her best friend's bed. And I don't want to give it away, but her best friend has had a major life event. She's been really shitty to this friend for the longest time, and they're finally starting to heal some emotional wounds. Then in the next panel, we see her she's looking at her phone. So that panel does reflect what she's reading. There's technically no solution for the problem of breaking up, no matter what side of the breaking you end up on. Next panel. There are 2 rumors about breaking up that I feel might be helpful to address here. One is that breakup should be clean. The other is that you should only break up when you're not in love. Look at the panel behind this. You don't see what the panel doesn't reflect what she's talking about, but it reflects other things that are important to these characters. This main character and her friend have this thing where they take old dolls and then they take them apart and then sew them back together in this sort of Frankenstein way. It's the thing that they do with each other, but it's a visual indicator of healing emotional wounds. The narration here doesn't directly show what's being talked about, but it's parallel in another way. It's complementary to the narrator and what they're saying. So your narration doesn't always have to, the art doesn't always have to reflect exactly what's being said in the narration. I love when characters, you have these quiet moments and someone is maybe musing and they're looking around the room and you see a clock on a wall and it's the clock and there's a little narration beside it. And then there's an object, a picture of their dog, and there's a little more narration. That is an example of not having to use, you're just showing sort of the ambiance of this character and the room that they're in, right? So you don't need to reflect things directly. I think Edna has questions. I will take questions after this. We'll getting towards the end. So Joyce actually did say something about this. Is this non-parallel narration, which we see a lot in manga, is also appropriate for middle-aged readers, or are there more concerns about confusing these youngsters? I would say this kind of narration, I know what you're actually asking. So non-parallel narration. You're right. You do tend to see it more in more mature titles. You see these sort of aspect to aspect shots where we're seeing more of a room or a field, something that's unrelated to the narration. Yes, I do believe you see it more in YA, maybe older mid-grade. But I don't think it's exclusive to those. I think middle school age readers and mid-grade readers, which are actually typically in elementary school, older elementary school, they're pretty smart. I think they would get this as well, but you might not want to overuse it. And yes, we'll have more questions. We'll ask more questions at the end, guys. Alrighty. So also try to avoid the obvious or exaggerated. So, and this was our pact. Nathaniel saying they're organic, have as many as you want. And the main character is thinking, I was starving. Now, you have kind of 2 options here. A lot of times I see people, they'll be like, the main character's thinking I was starving, and then they'll zoom in on like clutching their stomach, right? That's kind of the obvious route. But instead, this character, he's kind of trying to hide from Nathaniel what he really feels. So we just go to the next shot of he's impassive. And yet I turned down the offer. I'm good. I didn't think they were poisoned or anything ridiculous like that. I don't know. I guess I thought that taking one would give Nathaniel the impression that I was happy about his tagging along. Suit yourself. More for me. Like, we're hearing what's in the character's head. We hear that he's starving. We hear that he's kind of wary and hesitant. But these shots are very pulled back. They're not exaggerating the narrative. They're complementing. So it's okay to tone down things a little bit. Amy says, could be used well in a comedy irony sense for mid-grade. Oh, y'all are still talking about the other, this one. So we are actually towards the end. So I do want to open the floor a little bit because y'all are great. They'll always have good insights. Also, don't be afraid to let your narrator truly dwell in their interiority. So it's okay to have moments where the character is doing nothing at all. Like in Ash's cabin, we have Ash to set up camp. She's cuddled in with her dog. She checks her pocket. Where's the GPS? And instead of showing her frantically looking for it, we go straight to her journaling. We go to her musings, how she really feels about this moment. Don't be afraid to do that, especially in journaling comics, that you don't have to show everything. We can dwell in that character's headspace without having to show everything through art. Narration should aim to add an extra layer to the story rather than simply reflect it. If the story is the same without narration, you may need to either take it out or rewrite it. So if the narration doesn't do anything for the art or the panel, you might consider like, hey, do I really need this? Should I take it out? Or can I rewrite this in a way that adds an extra dimension to the story? So final questions to ask yourself. And this is the end, and then we'll do Q&A. I know it's a lot. First of all, who's your narrator? This is really important. It's easy to assume that the narrator is going to be the main character in your story, and maybe they are. But in Sparks by Ian Boothby and Nina Matsumoto, the narrator is their robotic litter box, their sentient litter box. And it's great because it gives an outside perspective of the two characters looking in. It adds humor. It gives a very different voice to the type of narration. I love it. So think, who is your narrator? Kind of interesting too, like there's actually two main characters in this story. So maybe having an outside narrator looking in makes it a little easier to not favor one narrator or one character over the other. Ask, who are your narrators addressing? In Laura Dean, Freddie is addressing an advice columnist. So every time there's narration, it's in the tone of her writing to the advice columnist. She's not talking to the reader. She's talking to the advice columnist, and it changes the way that the narration's delivered. So ask yourself, who is your narrator addressing? Are they addressing someone now? Are they addressing maybe their future self? In Lewis Hancock's book, he's actually addressing himself in the past at times, directly interacting with that person. So think about that. Who is your narrator addressing? How old is your narrator? This can really change the tone of your narration. Is the narrator a 16-year-old recounting sort of what happened last year? Or is it somebody who's now 100, recounting long, long ago in the past? This changes the tone of the story and the narration that you're going to write. In Electricity, Energy, and Action by Andy Hirsch, he has two narrators. He's got this guy and a younger girl, and they talk very differently. Like this panel here, there are times they talk directly, by the way. When they're on the panel, you have balloons. When they're off panel, you have squares for narration. But here you have this character. It's like a tub of water. No matter how full, nothing spills if we hold the sides even. But if one end is higher, the girl who's younger and very kind of energetic, don't you dare. Look at how different they speak because based upon their ages and based upon who they are, their personality. And last, what is their voice? What's the voice you're using to write these stories in? In Baby Mouse by Jennifer L. Holm and Matthew Holm, her straight whiskers should have tipped me off that she was trouble. Sneaky eyes, straight whiskers, cool shoes. But in my line of work, you see it all. She kept jabbering about some note. Look, I need you to pass this note on. I had my suspicions. What's it say? But the dame clammed up. Secret. It's written, the main character kind of like has this idea of relates everything to old movies that she's seen, old corny B movies. And in this particular instance, she's narrating as though it were sort of a film noir, right? So that picks up the tone of the story. So finally, what do you do to get started? Keep a character journal. I recommend this for all of you. If you don't know where to start with narration, if you're totally at a loss at how to write this character, keep a journal. Write down life from the head of this person. It doesn't even need to be like what you plan to write in the comic, but you gotta get inside the head of that character. So let me go ahead and end my share. And let's do questions. I'm sure I lost a few questions in there, so y'all may have to re-ask. Do y'all want to just like raise hands and ask your questions?
Rivkah, I'm gonna let you take charge of the Q&A because I do have to get out or head out.
Yeah.
Get out. Head out. So when you look at your Zoom screen, do you have a button that says end? I always want to make sure that I'm not gonna like shut down the whole Zoom if I leave.
There is an end, yes.
Okay, so
And
mine says leave, so it's okay if I leave. It's not gonna end.
you might want to, did you make me a co-host?
I think I made you the host.
Okay. I believe so.
Yes.
You know what I can do? Ask to mute. Yeah, I can make people hosts, so I am now host.
Okay.
I have the power, y'all.
All right, have an awesome Q&A. See you guys.
Thank you. Yay. Alrighty, who wants to ask their question first? If you want, there is a feature at the bottom, React. You can go ahead and raise your hand. So you can, there's a thing where it says raise hand. If you'll go ahead and raise your hand, and then I will call on you guys and you can unmute yourself. So Jerome, you raised your hand first. Don't forget to unmute yourself. Or did you accidentally raise your hand and not mean to? Because I've done that. Oh, can you not unmute yourself? I don't know. Ask to unmute. I'm not sure what's going on. You want to type your question in the chat?
Oh no, sorry, I just haven't done it in a minute. But yeah, thanks for doing this. My question is, like, I know we're talking about narration. How important or distracting do you find different types of lettering to denote like the tones of each of the characters? Because I'm in the process of redoing an old graphic novel, and I know that a lot of my dialogue is samey.
Yeah.
Right. Whether as dialogue or as narration, and I was looking to, switch up the lettering, just to play with the form a little bit. Would you find that distracting? Because I enjoy that stuff, but I don't want it to be like for my, like when I read, but I wouldn't want it to be distracting for anybody else. Like it would, I know there's a balance that has to do with it, but I'd like to know what your take is on it, and maybe some examples of who you think have done it well, and maybe who you think maybe
Oh, you're so specific.
have overdone it. Have overdone it. I'm sorry. Just like I'm in the thick of it.
No, that's okay. I love it. I like really specific questions. I will say, typically when I see people use narration, it's either written in the hand of the comic itself for balloons. It's just the balloons that are different, or a lot of times I see it italicized. So it uses the same font, but it's in italics. And it's when we see italics, it kind of makes us in prose. Italics in prose typically mean a thought. Someone's thinking something. You could try treatments if you wanted, like maybe you wanted to give the impression someone was writing in a journal. and you wanted to
Well,
show like
that's
bits
okay.
of the journal, right?
No, because that's exactly what it is. It's, you know, there's a brother and a sister, and one's writing in a journal and the other one's writing in a diary. So
Oh, that's cool. Oh,
before
I
I
like
had
that.
yellow boxes, but all the font was the same. So it was all it looked all the same. But I would maybe switch up the writing. I did put in the beginning of the chapters, I did put like a small head of them,
So you're
just kind of
actually reminding me,
cheat the language a little bit.
so Tegan and Sarah Junior High, that Tilly Walden illustrated, one of the things she did is there's dialogue, but there's also a couple of times where you see like narration. And what she did is one of the characters who is drawn in blue is her dialogue, her narrations in blue. The other character, because they're twins, so she draws them different colors. The other character, who's drawn in like a pinkish red, her narration is also pinkish red. So I don't know if you can see
Yeah.
that.
No, that's kind of what I was playing with, like especially because they do see the notebook. They like, you do see it, so you
Mhm.
know what the color of the pages are. But I'm not sure
Yeah.
if that me digging too deep and like doing some extra work that doesn't really need to be done. But I see it, so I feel like I just have to do it now anyway. So I've committed.
I think as long as you're consistent, people will get it.
Yeah.
And it's like there's so many ways you can play with that. Like, does one draw like stars around everything and hearts, and the other one's like really serious? I think also, if you wanted, you could try to play with different fonts.
Yeah.
Because maybe one character's voice is more playful, and maybe the other character is very serious.
Mhm.
And if you can find good fonts, difficulty there is you want the fonts to complement each other and to not be overpowering. And that can
Yeah.
be, I'll just say, it's difficult.
No,
So
I
it's
agree.
definitely something like, if you're feeling like you're not finding the right fonts, then you might consider like the color choice. Like, it's better to have all the same fonts than to have really poorly mismatched fonts. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I typically like hand letter, so
Oh,
I would
see,
just
there
have
you go.
I would just have to adjust. But
I could see like big bubbly letters and like really small cramped handwriting.
yeah, like one is a typical like smart girl writing, and then the other one is boy writing. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it.
all right. Well,
Go
thank
ahead
you.
and do it.
Thank you. I will see if I can figure out this mute button. Thanks for doing this, Rivka. Nice to
Thanks,
meet you,
Jerome.
everybody. Let's keep making comics.
Yeah, I hope it was useful for everyone. There's definitely, oh, Patrick asks
Patrick.
questions.
Sorry,
I will say I did have some examples at the end from that people submitted, and I have to just kind of apologize that we went over as always, and maybe a little too much over. So I'd rather focus on Q&A than critiquing examples. But I will, those who submitted examples, I will give some written feedback back on the forums. Okay, is that good? I see you're here, Roger.
Yeah, not necessary, but if you want to go
Thank
for
you.
it.
I will give y'all written
Yeah.
feedback because I said I would. Alrighty, Patrick.
Hi, Rivka. Great session. The mind boggles at your precision. So my question, I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the why behind, say, the choice of using a piece of dialogue maybe as narration versus having it be, say, a word balloon with the tail going off screen, if that makes sense. You know, like maybe the images are reaction shots, or rather than having a word balloon with the balloon tail going off the panel, you know, maybe to using it as a narration instead, or the other way around, where narration is then revealed to be dialogue.
I'm not sure I'm quite following.
Like, let's say you're reading a sequence where it starts as narration,
Okay.
but then you turn the page cover, the page turn reveals that narration is actually dialogue.
Oh,
right? Or
yeah.
the other way around, where it starts as dialogue, but then because you have a certain scene, a reaction shot, perhaps.
Yes. Andy Hirsch does this a lot. in his science comics books, because he always has a narrator that's present in the story, but they're often off panel and they often transition. So in that one electricity one, he specifically has 2 narrators, and he's got a couple cool devices. Like, I think that would be a good book to check out to see how he utilizes different devices to show when the characters are on panel versus off panel. And he even has like little icons for the characters at times, with one of them shaped like a little red atom and the other one's shaped like a little blue atom, but they're kind of like chibified. So he's got a lot of cool devices that he uses. Because he switches back and forth between characters and off-panel narration a lot.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, specifics, like I'd have to like sit here and draw it. I'm not sure we have time, but definitely check out the electricity one. That one he does, I think, of all the books of his, does the most flipping back and forth between characters and narration.
Excellent. Yeah, I need to build up my library of such examples.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Awesome. Anyone else? Are we good? Awesome. I love when I don't see hands sometimes, because then it's like, oh, cool. But I also love hands, because I know we can always dig deeper into this topic, because there were a lot more panels and pages when I first started. All righty.
I think your examples help a lot. Like it's easier to see it and understand it, like than just like an abstract concept. Like I've always seen it as more of like a way to excel the story, or like speed up the story, or like get a lot of information in one quick go, than like in, mapping out the story, drawing the entire story, or showing the story is a lot, takes a lot longer than to tell the story.
It does. It uses a lot of space to show, and narration is a way to tell, right? And there's times when you want showing, there's times you want telling. It's like, what is the purpose, right? Do you want to get to, point D without having to go through A, B, C and spend pages dedicated to it? Or you want to go from A to D within like one page or a couple panels, right? It's useful. It's a very useful tool.
Yep. Yeah. So it's interesting. Anyway, I appreciate all the different perspectives and way it's used. So it's cool.
Yeah, it is useful to have examples. I would never get a lecture without lots and lots of examples. Oh, and someone did ask for a list. This will be republished online, so you'll be able to actually pause the videos and see down at the bottom the slides. So you'll be able to, you can look up the, when you rewatch the video, just pause it, and every single slide has credits. So I recommend all of them. I always pick from the books I think are exceptional. So anything that I have in my class, I think is amazing. So, well, thank you everyone for being here. This was awesome, and hope y'all have a great day, and I hope y'all make great comics and awesome narration. Start those journals.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rivkah.